The biggest risk to your future isn't your competition. It's the distractions you insist on keeping in your life rather than doing the things you know you should be doing but aren't. People delay doing things they don't like for longer than it takes to do them.
There have been so many times in my life where I knew I needed to do something, and then I filled all this extra time not doing that thing. And then the moment I did it, I was like, wow, that took way less time than I thought it was going to take. And not only that, it took way less time than it took me to delay to actually get to this point. And if I had only started with just doing what I was supposed to do, I could have done 4 or 5 other things that I was also supposed to do by this exact same point. And so thinking about it from that perspective, I've tried to eliminate as much time between I think I should do this thing and beginning doing it. And I think you get this positive reinforcement cycle that occurs every time you start. I call it pulling the thread. It's like, I just need to start pulling the thread. And then all of a sudden what feels really unknown becomes very tangible. And you're like, oh, I understand the 6 problems I have to solve to do this big thing. But now I know the problems, and then it feels like you can wrap your arms around it, and then you can start taking it one bite at a time.
Your mind operates on a reward system. If you hijack this reward system and indulge in what people call instant gratification, you're basically rewarding yourself for doing nothing. And in order to actually stop the procrastination and start doing the necessary work again, you're gonna have to get rid of the things that are hijacking your reward system, which could be video games or scrolling on social media or whatever else. Then you can actually unlock the ability to work again.
Bad things don't come in threes. Bad things happen, people don't know how to cope, and they allow one bad thing to snowball into more. Bad stuff sucks. The only thing worse is letting one bad thing ruin many good things.
I'm glad you found that one. The amount of, I think it happens more when you're younger, but, girlfriend breaks up with you. Okay, then you go into work and you sulk because you're distracted, and then you don't do the same level of effort and you're not enthusiastic. And then all of a sudden your work suffers and you get put on a PIP or you get fired. And then now you're fired and you don't have a girlfriend, and then you start gaining weight and you stop going to the gym. And all of a sudden you're like, man, bad things happen in threes. It's like, no, bad things happen all the time, and they only become interrelated if you let it affect your behavior. And so I think the equal opposite of that is thinking, okay, this bad thing occurred. What can I do to decrease the likelihood something else bad occurs in the meantime? And then boiling everything down to activities or the actions that I have to take. And I think about that actually a lot, which is how, if you think about from the power perspective of, okay, something bad happens, how much would it affect my behavior? Well, the person who's indestructible would have something terrible happen and then nothing would change. And I love that.
Or they'd get better.
Exactly, yeah.
That's anti-fragility, right?
Yeah, the sword of Gryffindor. It only drinks in that which makes it stronger.
The people don't know how to cope thing, especially with bad stuff, is it does explain why you end up with this weird spiral. Tiny little avalanche pebble at the top, and then this huge sort of over-exaggerated reaction downstream.
Yeah, people don't know how to manage their emotions. I think the more, at least for me, the more I've tried to create space between how I feel and what I do, the more consistent my outcomes have been.
What do you mean?
So if I need to create content and I'm not feeling it, or I'm feeling tired, or things like that, the more times I give into that excuse or that feeling, then the more superstitious I become about doing it in the future. Whereas a lot of times if I can just start when I am tired or when something is painful and then still execute about the same as before, I look at game tape or I look at video or I look at the content from those sessions, for example, and I see that I remember feeling terrible during the session, but you can't really see anything. And I think the more times you get that loop going, the more you can separate how you feel and what is required. And the more times you do what is required to get what you want, the more times you get what you want.
I spoke to Huberman last year. I think it's called the anterior mid-singular cortex. It's an area of the brain. If I've got that right, fucking yes, bro. The best advert for Newtonic ever. Basically, there is an area of the brain that tracks when you do something that you don't want to do, and you strengthen the connections in it by doing things that you don't want to do, especially when you really don't want to do them. So you're hypertrophying. It's this exact sort of intuition that you've got that some people would call it resilience or willpower or whatever, but this is neurologically represented in the brain. These connections get stronger. So I think it's so funny. Gym bros will need a gym analogy in order to be able to believe that their brain changes. But it's really useful to think, hey, you're hypertrophying this area of your brain.
Most of the suffering that we ever experience in our lives is internal. It doesn't happen outside of our heads. Many people see bad stuff happening as their personal losses, but the truth is that in most cases, you don't even have control over those things. The only thing you truly have control over is your actions and your mind. The outcomes are random. What you focus on and how it affects you is your responsibility, which means you have power over it.
Slaves worked all the hours they were awake for their entire lives. In American history, in Egyptian history, in the rest of the world that had slaves, which is most of the world at some given point. I think, like, if they can do it, so can I. Now you're like, well, did they have a happy existence? Well, they didn't get to pick the work they did, but it means that you can work. That's if you have the cat behind you. You can work every hour of the day. I'm like, well, if you get to have the cheese and you get to eat the cheese the whole way you're going, then, I mean, there's the famous quote, the person who loves walking walks further than the person who loves the destination, right? And so, like, I think it's the same thing. But so many people want to project their idea of what they think your life should be like onto you. And it's just completely irrelevant. It just doesn't matter. Like, if all I did, if I weren't married, right? Because people are like, okay, well, he is married, and like, I am in shape, but I also just like working out. But if I didn't have either of those things and all I did was work all day, more people would talk about the work-life balance thing for me than they currently do. And who cares? I fundamentally am like, you are going to die and you're not going to matter. And I'm going to die and I'm not going to matter. So why do I care about what you're going to say when you're not even going to show up to my funeral? Who gives a shit?
What is it that you're taking an enjoyment from then? The one step deeper than this, there is something that you're optimizing for.
Oh, I love the reward.
What reward?
The micro rewards I get every day. Like,
of operating a business.
Of all things business related.
Yep.
So I love writing the book about business. I love talking to my editor about what we're changing. Oh, that's a really way better way to say it, right? Or I like tweeting about the thoughts that we have. I love doing discussions like this because I talk about my favorite topic, which is business for the most part. And I actually am pretty averse to punishment. I've learned that about me. Like, I do not like it. And when I say punishment in the formal sense, like things you don't like, right? And so, like, I avoid them like the plague. I don't do them. And so I just do as many of the things I can that reward me as frequently as possible.
But from the outside, to a lot of people, that looks like punishment.
Right. Yes.
Interesting. How can someone cut through societal expectations, the ways they've dealt with past trauma, expectations from parents, all of the things that aren't their thing?
Yeah.
How can somebody, because what you've done, again, axiomatically, a priori, this is the thing I want to optimize for. How do people find the thing that they want to optimize for? I don't have a thing. Alex, that's fucking great for you with your business. It just happens to be something else that's at the intersection of making a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
How do I find it?
And I was lucky with that.
Yes.
That just happened to be the intersection. Because if I love knitting and I didn't like business, that's a whole separate, because like you can turn knitting into a business, but like if I only like knitting, then there's a way to make a living from that. But to get to the person who's like, how do I find my thing? I'm a big fan of being directionally correct rather than absolutely correct. And so I think what happens is most people are trying to find the perfect answer when they have no perspective from which to make a judgment. They're trying to find the perfect thing to do when they haven't done anything. So how would you have perspective to make a judgment? Like, if you try a lot of things in the beginning, which you have to know what your inputs, outputs are, decrease your action threshold enough with either a cheese or a cat, whatever you need. Most people have more cats than they have cheese in the beginning. So use the cat to start running towards something. And the thing is the rat, it's so simple. It's like there's cheese here. But what you really just need to know is that there's cheese out there. And there's a cat behind me for sure. And so if I just go anywhere away from the cat, I will have a higher likelihood of getting closer to the cheese. Not that I will find it, but I will get closer to it. And I think and I've lived my life through a series of rapid iterations, not trying to pick the right thing. Because I just even when I started my first business, I was between frozen yogurt, test prep, and a gym. Those are the three businesses that I was choosing between.
Makes complete sense, yeah.
Right? It's a lot of things that I like, right? And so I was choosing between those things, and why were those the things? I was like, well, I was pretty good at taking tests in college, so I get that. I like frozen yogurt. And I mean, it sounds simple, but I was like, everybody likes something, right? And I actually didn't know that I was going to like business. That's the crazy thing. Because also, when you and I were younger, Instagram wasn't there. YouTube, like none of this shit existed. And entrepreneurship wasn't cool yet. And so I just hated my job a lot. And I hated where I lived a lot. And so I was like, well, I will just not be here. So Cat, don't know what city I'm going to go to, but just not this city.
Yep.
I went across the furthest place from Baltimore, which is California. And then I was like, okay, well, what do I hate doing? Well, let me not do that, which is, sitting on meetings all day and doing whatever, doing grunt work for shit that I felt like was meaningless. And instead, I was like, I'll do fitness because I like fitness. And I was like, at the very least, I'll do something I enjoy, which I liked fitness at the time. And if you're like, well, I don't like doing anything. It's like, well, then that's impossible because your brain is wired to be rewarded for things. And so you are doing things that reward you. That's why you do them. Like everything we do is because we've been rewarded for doing things like that in the past. And we project the same activities and we predict that doing things like we did in the past that reward us will reward us again in the future. That's where our behavior comes from. And so it's like, okay, well, what has rewarded you in the past? Where's the cat? Go the opposite way.
Yeah. So the reverse role model is something similar, but you're almost taking this into a lifestyle perspective. So the reverse role model is if you live in a town or you grow up somewhere and there's no one around you like the sort of person that you want to be like, but there are tons of people like the person you don't want to be like, you can say, there's a waymarker. I don't want his relationship with gambling. I don't want the way that he handles his finances. I don't want the way that him and his wife communicate with each other. It's like, okay, there we go. Warren Buffett or Munger says like an amazing amount of success has been achieved by not trying to be smart but avoiding being stupid. So there's your waymarkers there. But what you're saying is that this is almost like a abstracted lifestyle version of this. These are all of the things that I hate to do. What's the opposite of that?
Yeah.
And the challenge of I don't know precisely what the exact thing is, therefore I can't move toward it, is one of mine, which is perfectionism is procrastination masquerading as quality control.
I was going to say it's a fallacy. It's a decision-making fallacy. It's the same. This is why investor frames can be so useful. Like if you're looking for the perfect investment, you won't find one. There's always downsides. Every investment has risk, right? And so using that frame, you're like, well, there's all these paths. Which one do I choose? It's like, well, you have to. The one thing that's guaranteed is if you keep the money, it will go down in value because it'll inflate, right? So not investing is the only way guaranteed to not get a return on your investment.
Is that the fact that inflation exists, do you think that's a useful motivating force for business people? You could imagine a different form of world economics where, like embedded growth obligations weren't there and like whatever, inflation didn't happen. Do you think that sort of motivates people to actually be like, oh fuck, like I need to do something with this money. I can't just sit and leave it in the bank.
I think it would motivate investors.
Yes.
More, yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, the business people would just like probably keep more coins in their vault and just keep transacting.
Who's that Scrooge McDuck?
Yeah, they'd be less likely to deploy capital faster. Because if you feel like there's a cost of capital that's higher for keeping it, like letting it sit there, then you have a higher urgency to do something with it. If you have less urgency, then you only do it when you know it's going to crush.
Motivation means deprivation. Usually, if you really want to get something, that's probably also something that you currently lack. If you're only going to compare yourself to very rich people, then you're going to be very deprived of money, and that's likely going to motivate you to get some. But motivation can also come from fears. For example, if through your current lifestyle you're suffering a lot, that's going to motivate you to get as far away from here as possible. Successful people both master the art of deprivation and rewarding oneself. If you're able to identify what fuels you, you're able to use it to your advantage.
Jimmy Carr broke my brain with this one. Everyone is jealous of what you've got. No one is jealous of how you got it.
I love that quote.
My God. People see the trophies, but not the training ground.
Everybody wants the view, but no one wants the climb. I love it. But the people who win love the climb. And the real mountain has no peak. And so the view is always present the whole way up the climb. And
it seems to me, to push back there, it seems to me like a lot of the time you're head down, the pleasure comes from the climb, not the view for you. Again, maybe sort of non-typically constructed from a psychological perspective. That was nice. That was diplomatic. So what would you say, and this is something that I think, with these episodes that we do, I often want to try and get you to push a little bit more to adapt your ideas and your insights for people who maybe do have a little bit more of that emotionality that comes through to try and sort of soften this up. Look, I understand that people need more degrees of freedom than me, typically. I understand that people probably can't get themselves to the level of work that I can. So do you ever sort of play with that idea of, okay, what does a little bit of view taking in look like whilst we're climbing?
I think a lot of the discontent comes from the judgment people have about what they should or should not do along the way. And so they take my description as prescription for what they should do. So I describe my life, and then people think I'm prescribing what they should do, and it couldn't be further from the truth. If you want to take a break at every 2 steps and take in the view, do it. I mean, in 4 generations, no one will remember your name. And so enjoy the view if you feel like it. I just happen to enjoy how much I can see that I can do. That's what I enjoy. And I feel like I am most present when I work. And so I'm not going to go into work-life balance, whatever, because we already know where that conversation goes. But people have a harder time accepting that someone can just work all the time and truly love it. And I define that by there's nothing else I would rather do at any time. And so for me, I feel like I exercise absolute freedom in my life. And freedom is reinforcing for all species. Dogs, cows, fish, humans. Freedom is one of the most positively reinforcing thing that people have, that everyone wants freedom.
Everybody wants to be able to say "fuck you."
Right. But once you say "fuck you," you have to do something, because you can't just stand there and saying "fuck you" over and over again for hours for the rest of your life. You start to do something, and that thing that you choose to do after you say "fuck you" is what you want to do.
That's an interesting point. So there are certain things that you have to do to get to the point where you don't have to do things you don't want to do. And then when you're liberated, there is a whole new challenge now, because it's a completely blank map where you have to actually define that. That's one of the things, about working for yourself. There's a lot of derogation about 9-to-5s and university education and kind of the typical track and stuff. Like, bro, you should be very cautious about criticizing people that have more normal salaried 9-to-5 jobs, because I look at most of my friends and they can't not take their work home with them. So for certain psychological makeups, who's more free? The person that actually gets to shut their work laptop at 5 p.m. In France, they've got this new policy now where you can't email staff after, I think it's maybe 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. at night in certain businesses, to try and sort of enforce this work-life balance and stuff like that. So for certain people, you're shaking your head. What's your problem?
I mean, my first thought was, well, France just took its irrelevant economy and just made it less relevant. And secondarily, the person who made that rule is someone who fundamentally doesn't understand human behavior. So if they were to pass that rule for me, then what they did is they actually made my life worse.
This was the thing when Elon took over Twitter. So it's one of my favorite stories over the last couple of years. Elon buys Twitter. Elon finds out that 80% of the staff base just drink smoothies and go on hot girl walks all day. And he fires them. Yeah. And says, this team, it was him and a bunch of Asian dudes, selfie. And he says, this is the team that's going to run Twitter now. And he puts, I think, a job posting out, maybe on Twitter. And he says, I want people who want to work harder than they ever have on the most difficult problems in the world, and blah, 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 blah. And he got tons of shit for it. And they said, this is a regressive policy for industry. This is taking people back to sending kids up the chimneys and so on and so forth. And it's just a complete failure of theory of mind that there are people out there for whom that is the job advert. I want to work harder than I ever have on the most difficult problems in the world at an intensity that would kill most people, because that's where I derive pleasure and satisfaction from. That's the best situation that I could hope for. And trying to take your model of, well, yeah, but what about my maternity leave? And yeah, but what about, jeans Fridays? And yeah, but what about, hot girl walks? All of that is those are things that people don't want. Adding those in gets in the way of the thing that they do want.
I think a lot of the confusion around the people who are wanting to work harder than they are, or don't like that I work hard or that you work hard, think that they take this statement as a judgment or a criticism on how they live their life. And it's because on the other side of that free line, you're like, okay, I'm now free, I have a blank slate. If I do something or you do something that they deem painful for them now, or something that they don't enjoy, they then say, you are suffering and that is bad. And both of those things I reject wholeheartedly. First, you don't know that I'm suffering because you have no idea what's going on inside of me, and also, what does your judgment mean at all to me?
There's a Tim Cook internal memo that he sent. There's a saying that if you do what you love, you will never work a day in your life. At Apple, I learned that is a total crock. You will work harder than you ever thought possible, but the tools will feel light in your hands.
So good.
Chef's kiss. Chef's kiss, Tim Cook.
I hope this video reminded you of something important. Chase that which you deem worthwhile, and subscribe to this channel for more reminders like this, because we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught.